Have your fantasy teams been struggling this year? Or perhaps you've been doing pretty well but want to put yourself over the top? Then make sure to visit our friends over at Finish First Fantasy Advisors. They are the premier one-on-one consulting firm that specializes in providing you with expert support to help guide you to the championship. You will be matched with one of their expert advisors to provide you with the season-long insight for your redraft, dynasty, or DFS formats. Their advisors will contact you weekly to answer all of your questions and provide you the needed information to get to the next level. Set up a free 15-minute consultation by emailing them at info@finishfirstfantasy.com or by visiting them at www.finishfirstfantasy.com. That's www.finishfirstfantasy.com. Hello and welcome again to another episode of the SkullKing Sports Fantasy Football Podcast. Brought to you by Dr. Squatch Soaps. Get 20% off orders of $20 or more when you order at drsquatch.com using the promo code SKS20 at checkout. That's 20% off orders of $20 or more at drsquatch.com when you use the promo code SKS20 at checkout. My name is Ryan Scullard. I am the host of the show tonight. And I had a little difficulty figuring out what I wanted to do for tonight. I didn't necessarily want to kind of go over all the games that were coming up this week, especially since we're unsure right now about what's going to happen with a couple of these games. So what I thought I would do is, since we are through week 4, I'd go ahead and do a first quarter review. So that's what we're doing tonight. We're gonna go over some of the news stories. Some of the headlines from the week. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just kind of go through and give some of my surprises. Some of my surprises, a couple of players that I think are doing more than expected that could come back down to earth, as well as some players that I think you should not give up on quite yet. So that's kind of where we're going with the show tonight. And in general, some guys that just I did not see it coming that they were able to do quite this much, and keep riding it as long as you can. So that's where we're going with the show. So I think that's all I have for announcements or anything, so why don't we just jump right into this and get into today's headlines.
Today's headlines.
And our headlines are brought to you by the Sleeper app, one of the top platforms for doing your fantasy football leagues. Not only do they have awesome settings for creating your own dynasty league, you can run redraft leagues on them as well. Plus, you get massive amounts of alerts in terms of player news and things like that, breaking news through that app. Really a solid app to use for your fantasy football season. So here we go with story number 1. 2 more positive COVID tests for Tennessee this morning. This is recording this Wednesday night, so 2 more positive tests for Tennessee. One of those included Corey Davis, who is now on the COVID list for Tennessee. And to go along with this, there are indications, a story came out that there were Titans players deliberately breaking the team protocols about not meeting together. One of the Titans' longtime journalists got pictures, apparently, of Titans players practicing at a local high school. The high school students said that it was Tennessee Titans players. There are Tennessee Titans players on, I believe A.J. Brown actually said on Twitter, when seeing the picture, said, "You can't prove that any of these guys are us. I plead the 5th." So that kind of tells you what's going on there. We will have to see what kind of goes on from here. As long as there are no more positive tests in the morning, and they can keep that going, it still looks like Tennessee is going to be playing Buffalo this weekend. If it is determined that that they broke protocols, if there's more positive tests, I honestly think that a forfeit is coming. I've seen calls for them to forfeit both this past week against Pittsburgh as well as next week against Buffalo. I mean, I guess that's possible. So as of right now, it looks like, as of this morning, so as of Wednesday morning, the New England-Denver game and the Tennessee-Buffalo game remain on schedule, but we'll see what happens over, well, when you guys listen to this, we'll see what will have happened this morning. So as of right now, I am cautiously optimistic and at the same time a little pessimistic. I would be prepared to not have the Tennessee-Buffalo game played. New England and Denver, we'll see. With obviously Cam Newton is on there, and of course the announcement yesterday about Stephon Gilmore testing positive as well this morning. So again, we'll just kind of see how this goes. So story number 2. Man, the Buccaneers are beat up going into a Thursday night game against the Chicago Bears. The Bucs have already ruled out Chris Godwin, Justin Watson, and LaShawn McCoy, with Leonard Fournette doubtful and Mike Evans and Scotty Miller questionable. I mean, this game may come down to, this may be a big Cameron Brayton and Rob Gronkowski game. They may have to have Cameron Brate play wide receiver in this one. This is how depleted they are right now. So obviously something to watch. I'm guessing that Evans will probably still play. Miller, I believe, is a chest injury, so I'm not sure. He might still play as well. But again, something to watch. Make sure you've got backups in play, ready to go. Number 3, Dwayne Haskins has been demoted, not to being the backup, but to being the quarterback 3 behind Kyle Allen and Alex Smith, meaning Kyle Allen will be the starter. Alex Smith will be the second to come in. Now, I know that there are a lot of people that are really supporting Haskins, and he hasn't played terrible, especially compared to last year. But one thing that we have to remember is that this season, he now has his third head coach brought in that didn't draft him, that wasn't part of the previous regime, new offensive coordinator. There's a lot going on not in Dwayne Haskins' favor. He played only one season as a starting quarterback in college. Usually, that does not necessarily, that's usually a hindrance of someone having a good career in the NFL. Just because they did it 1 year, usually you want a track record of 2 to 3 years of success at the NFL level. And let's not forget, Dwayne Haskins came out after his redshirt sophomore year, I believe. So he didn't have a ton of college play. So again, very interesting. And for me, I almost kind of want to see Kyle Allen really not do well just so Alex Smith can play again. Just how big would that be? But couple of little things. Jimmy Garoppolo is back to limited practice, so we won't have to worry about the Nick Mullins and C.J. Beathard conversation anymore. It looks like Garoppolo is most likely going to be playing this next weekend. Le'Veon Bell is eligible to come off of IR. And the Saints and Chargers game, the Saints have actually petitioned, it looks like, or they are in the process of. Let me get that. They're considering evacuating to Indianapolis on Thursday because of Hurricane Delta, and have discussed a contingency plan with the NFL to play their Monday night game against the Chargers in Indianapolis. Now, considering that with COVID, this actually makes the most sense because you're not worried about fans showing up. Since most stadiums aren't having fans in the games anyways, this works really well and is a very viable idea that I think the NFL should seriously consider for this game for Monday night. So, all right, that's it for the stories. Why don't we go ahead and get into our first quarter review of the season? So what I'm going to do is, like I said, I'm going to go through. I've got a couple quarterbacks, a few running backs, a few wide receivers, some tight ends, and just some guys I want to look at, guys that are doing well that I wasn't expecting, guys that are not doing well, and just kind of go through that, and kind of look at where guys are at, and compared to where we expected them. So, let me pull this up right there. Okay. So, starting off with the quarterbacks, I think the big surprise for me is Josh Allen. I mean, a lot of people talk about, Russell Wilson. We weren't expecting him to be quarterback number one this early. I mean, he was back and forth with Lamar Jackson last year as quarterback one through like the first 6 to 8 weeks. So I'm not necessarily surprised. I'm surprised how much more they're allowing Russell Wilson to pass. But the fact that they're doing it is allowing him to score more points than he used to. Josh Allen is the surprise, really, for me, because of the fact he is number 3 overall in scoring for quarterbacks, and he's number 3 in game or in points per game. Josh Allen has had an absolutely phenomenal season this year passing the ball. Let me see. Let me pull up his actual stats. He has thrown. Let's see. He has thrown for over 1,300 yards. He's on pace for okay. Josh Allen and Russell Wilson are on pace for throwing for over 5,000 yards. That's how crazy this season is already in terms of passing. Josh Allen has a 70.9% completion percentage after having a 52.8 and a 58.8 the last 2 years. I mean, he's on pace to throw for as many yards as he did the last 2 years combined. Just insane what he is doing right now. He's already thrown for more touchdowns this year than he did in his first season. In 4 games, he's thrown for 12, and he only threw for 10 in 2018. So just what he is doing is amazing. And just not at all what any of us expected. So he's like my big surprise. Another big surprise in a good way. Let me pull it up, and this is actually, I'm going to do this based on average points per game. Justin Herbert, after three starts, is the QB 10 based on points per game. So he's only missed 1 game, the first game where they had Tyrod Taylor starting. When he came in and had to start game 2 because of the punctured lung for Tyrod Taylor, since then he has thrown for 300 yards, I believe, in each game, or at least close to it. And he's averaging basically 21 points a game, QB 10 based on points per game. So really a outstanding season for him so far. It's going to be hard to. I think it's going to be hard to justify once Tyrod Taylor comes back, Coach Lynn sitting him for Tyrod Taylor. So there really isn't any quarterback that I think is really, fallen off. I mean, Matt Ryan and Deshaun Watson, obviously not what you'd expect, but Matt Ryan is dealing with injuries, has been dealing with injuries to Julio Jones, dealing with hamstring injuries. And they haven't been able to get in the end zone all that much, to be honest. I mean, they have in a couple of games, but at the same time, they've also been shut down a little bit. He's averaging less than 20 points per game. And while, 3-4 years ago, that would have been pretty good, it's just they're not. I mean, I think he's on pace for almost 5,000 yards as well. So he's throwing the ball a ton, just not necessarily throwing for the touchdowns. So he's sorry. Matt Ryan has 19.5 points per game. And then Deshaun Watson, I think we all kind of saw this coming, averaging 19.12 points per game, just above Matthew Stafford and Jared Goff. I think a lot of us saw this coming when there wasn't going to be DeAndre Hopkins. He doesn't have a legit number one wide receiver anymore, so that's obviously greatly hindered his ability to do much. So there's our quarterbacks. Why don't we go ahead and move on to the running backs and make sure that we have this not in standard scoring, but in half-point PPR, because that's what we mainly do here, is where we base all of our rankings on, is half-point PPR. Big surprise, Mr. James Robinson is running back 6. Even based on points per game, he is still, running back 7. Running back 8. So just a phenomenal season from him so far. Not what you would expect, considering that this was supposed to be, Leonard Fournette's contract year. And then when they released him, this was Raquel Armstead's backfield. And then Chris Thompson was dealing with injuries, and Raquel Armstead goes on COVID. So here, I guess we'll just throw James Robinson into it. And James Robinson has been phenomenal. Played really, really well this year. So he's a top 10 running back right now, averaging 17.4 points per game. He's a must start basically at this point so far. That you really can't sit because they're using a very run based offense in Jacksonville. Next up, in terms of points per game, 14.1 points per game is Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon was the running back 1 last week. Going into week 4, Joe Mixon was running back 38, averaging 7.9 points per game in half-point PPR. And because of week 4, he is now overall running back 8, and in terms of average points per game, is running back 12. Absolutely insane. But this is what you get with Joe Mixon. And he doesn't necessarily have a great... Here, let me pull up his... There we go. Pull up his next few starts against at Baltimore, at Indianapolis, who's been absolutely filthy on defense this year, especially against the run. At Cleveland, who's middle of the road. Tennessee, who's given up a lot on the ground, so that possibly could be a decent game for him. Then a bye week in week 9, and then week 10 he goes up against Pittsburgh, who's been absolutely deadly against the run, holding it down. So he does not have favorable matchups coming up. So I'm again this week going to move him down in my rankings because I'm not expecting him to put up those kind of numbers again. I expect him to be more close to running back 15 to 20 than he will be at running back 1 to 5 like he was last week. So moving on. Another thing to look at, some guys may be panicking a little bit on Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I wouldn't be. And here's why. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, in terms of points per week in half-point PPR, is running back 17. A lot of people drafted him in the first round. I drafted him in the first round in a league, in a half-point PPR league. I think I drafted him I think he was the 6th or 7th running back off the board. I had the 9th or 10th pick and managed to get him. I'm not panicking with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He's averaging 14.1 points per week, which is the equivalent of running back 17. But he has no touchdowns yet through 4 games. If he had only one touchdown, that would actually bring him up from running back 17 in half-point PPR to running back 12 in half-point PPR. And then we're having that conversation of, okay, he's right about where, he's in that plus or minus. If you drafted him, say, running back 8 or 9, 3 to 4 positions up or down, he's within that margin of error, if you want to call it. So I think the touchdowns are going to come for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. They're not there yet, but I think they're going to come. So I'm not panicking. Again, looking forward to his schedule. Versus Las Vegas. Let's see if I can pull it up here. Versus Las Vegas, great matchup. Versus Buffalo, another great matchup. I want to say they're right now bottom 10 in terms of giving up fantasy points to the running back position. Then Denver, who's been pretty stiff against running backs. Then he gets the Jets and Carolina, who are two of the worst teams against the run. So he has a very, very good schedule coming up over these next 5 weeks, with a bye week in Week 10. I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire is going to start getting touchdowns and going to start getting good points for you. Do not panic. One guy to definitely panic on. Moving on to is Kenyon Drake. He was drafted, it looks like, right around that running back 17 spot. Now, he has some good matchups coming up. He's got the New York Jets. Dallas Cowboys kind of back and forth. Then he gets Seattle in Week 7. And Seattle is actually in the top 5 in terms of defending against the running back position. They give up everything in the pass game, but they're pretty good against the run. And then he gets Miami and Buffalo, which are decent matchups. The thing is, what worries me about Kenyon Drake is the fact that they're utilizing so much of the passing game, much more than they did last year in Arizona, because they have DeAndre Hopkins. They're allowing Kyler Murray to throw a lot more. And in the passing game, talking about the passing game, Kenyon Drake is actually getting out-targeted by Chase Edmonds. I want to say it's like 17-5. Chase Edmonds, 17 targets through 4 weeks. And let's see where I think it's right here. Kenyon Drake has 5 targets. Did not get targeted in the last game. 2, 2, 1, and 0. While you have Chase Edmonds, who's in the top 15 in the league for running backs in targets. 5, 4, 2, and 6. I mean, they talked about at the beginning of the year that Chase Edmonds could start for most teams. That's what Kingsbury was saying. Now, it could have just been, coach hyperbole, but that tells you something about their belief in Chase Edmonds. And if something isn't going right with Kenyon Drake, we could see a switch. So, all right. So moving on to the wide receivers, some big surprises for me. I never would have expected DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett to be the equivalent of last year's Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. But that's what they are right now. Going on to the wide receivers. In half-point PPR, Tyler Lockett is wide receiver number 2, averaging 16.7 points per game. DK Metcalf is number 8, averaging 16.1 points per game. And really, if you go to standard scoring, it actually flips. DK Metcalf's number 2 and Tyler Lockett's number 6. But Tyler Lockett tends to get targeted more. If you're in full PPR, Tyler Lockett's 4, DK Metcalf is 8. So the fact that Seattle is utilizing the pass game so much, I mean, it's not what it's not what a lot of people expected. It's what people were asking for. People in Seattle were begging for this. Hashtag let Russ cook has been going on, especially in Seattle, forever. And they're finally letting him do it. And because of it, it is proving to be a very, very successful model. So just not what I was expecting. I honestly expect to continue to see this. Now, if they don't both finish in the top 10, I won't necessarily be surprised. I think they both finish in the top 15. That's kind of what I expected if they were a little bit, taking the next step up and they're allowing Russ to throw a little bit more. It very well could be possible that as long as everyone stays healthy, they both finish. They could both finish near the top 5. That's how dominant, especially DK has been. So, another big surprise for me, CeeDee Lamb. Right now he is wide receiver number 14. He's 13 in terms of points per week at 13.7 points. So he is obviously taken over Michael Gallup in terms of the number 2 wide receiver. He works a lot from the slot, which I think provides a lot of value to someone like Dak Prescott, who in years past really depended on Jason Witten and Cole Beasley. So, because Lamb runs most of his routes in the slot, he basically gets a lot of those same types of routes as Beasley and Witten does. But because he's bigger, stronger, more athletic, he's going to turn those into more points. So, CeeDee Lamb is definitely a guy that you're going to be starting every week, especially because they can't stop anyone from scoring. Dallas is going to have to keep throwing the ball like this. I mean, Dak Prescott is on pace for like 6,400 pass yards. I mean, that's how ridiculous it is right now for Dallas. So I think it's 3 consecutive 400-yard passing games. Justin Jefferson, wide receiver 19. Now, I had a question last week in my weekly pre-game Sunday live stream. Someone asked me, Justin Jefferson or Julio Jones? At this point, Justin Jefferson had the one huge game. I said Julio Jones. If we think Julio Jones is going to be healthy, play Julio Jones. Because if Julio Jones is healthy, he's, in my opinion, he is the more proven commodity, if you want, for lack of a better term. Justin Jefferson had one game, was basically not used in week 1. I think he may have had an injury. Week 2, a little bit. Week 3 had explosive game, huge game, 175 yards plus and one of those was a 71-yard touchdown. And then so I went Julio. Now we all know Justin Jefferson had a really good game again. I am now to the point seeing that Justin Jefferson has put that together 2 weeks in a row and that they're trusting him. I can now I would start to lean towards Justin Jefferson. Because it takes a pattern for me to I'm not going to just switch to a rookie because he has one big game. Now he's had 2, and this week he has a really good matchup against my Seattle Seahawks where they haven't been able to stop anyone in the pass game. So Justin Jefferson's likely in for another big game. So I would take this week Justin Jefferson over Julio Jones, who likely is still going to be nursing that hamstring injury. So, but yeah, Justin Jefferson is right now wide receiver 19, and I look to see him moving up the rankings a little bit. Big surprise, not necessarily for me though. DJ Moore. For those of you who drafted DJ Moore to be, I want to say, wide receiver 14, he is wide receiver 35, averaging 9.5 points per week in half-point PPR. I'm not going to say I told you so, because he could come out of this. In terms of targets, I want to say he's in like the top 10. Let's see, where's it? He's the top 12 in terms of targets. He's averaging 8 targets a game. However, Robbie Anderson is getting, 8.5 per game. I think Robbie Anderson is turning into the wide receiver 1 in this offense. Now, again, we go back to DJ Moore had a great season last season. And everyone expected a lot out of him. But because part of that was they were running a high-powered offense, not necessarily a high-powered offense. They were running a high-tempo offense. They ran the 6th most amount of plays, had the 3rd most amount of pass attempts. But if you look at DJ Moore's efficiency, it's not very good over the last couple of years. When he had a more stable offense that could run the ball and wasn't just predicated on playing catch-up, which they're kind of again doing this year, he has not performed all that well. His yards after catch per reception is not great. It's very middle of the road, so and that's for running back or for wide receivers and tight ends. So I'm not buying DJ Moore. I understand the target share is there, but with a quarterback like Teddy Bridgewater, that Robbie Anderson is just playing a downfield guy. That's what he is. That's not DJ Moore. DJ is more of a slot guy. I trust Robbie Anderson right now, obviously more than I do DJ Moore. I don't think DJ Moore, again, he had he had to not only, in order to have match last year, he had to improve his efficiency in an offense that was likely going to slow down, not have as many plays, not be as high tempo, not pass as much. So he has to improve efficiency just to come close to what he did last year. And I'm not seeing that happen. So, couple more. Jameson Crowder, he is number 3 in points per week, but he's only played 2 weeks. I like Jameson Crowder. I think he's great for PPR, half-point PPR, because of how many targets he gets. Because, Sam Darnold is going to continue to target him. Sam Darnold's not playing this week, though. So you're dealing with the injury there. And again, it's a matter of, can Crowder stay healthy? The other guy I want to look at was Cole Beasley, wide receiver 26, 10.3 points per week. Cole Beasley is on pace for 1,000 yards this year. In Buffalo as the wide receiver 3. That's never something I expected to see. But Cole Beasley is a flex play in 10-team leagues, and he's a wide receiver 3 in 12-team leagues. He's borderline wide receiver 2, low end wide receiver 2 in 12-team half-point PPR leagues. So just something to keep an eye on as you're going through the season. All right, rounding off with the tight ends. Robert Tonyan is tight end 1 because of 1 week. I went over this in the last podcast. I don't think that Robert Tonyan is the next big thing. He's not the next George Kittle. You know why? Because he's not going to get targeted like George Kittle. Tight ends. George Kittle, let's see, in average per game, in average targets per game, he's averaging 10. And that's because he went out early in week 1 and only had 5 targets. Missed games 2 and 3. Had 15 in week 4. He's going to continue to get that many targets. Let me scroll down, see where I can find him. Let's see. Mr. Robert Tonyan is averaging. Can I even find him here? Or is he listed? Nope, there he is. Is averaging 3.5 targets per game. Didn't get a target in week 1, got 3 in week 2, 5 in week 3, 6 in week 4. Now, he did a lot with those targets in those 3 games. But in each of those games, there wasn't a Davante Adams. When Davante Adams comes back, Robert Tonyan may still have close to the same efficiency. Scoring, 5 touchdowns in 3 weeks? On, was it 12 targets? 3, 5, 9, no, 3, 5, 8, 4, on 14 targets. 5 touchdowns and 14 targets. Davante Adams is going to get those red zone targets when he comes back. When he is healthy, now that they've got a bye week, when he gets back, Robert Tonyan is going to stay at those 3.5 targets per game, if not go down. And therefore is not going to be the next George Kittle. Period. Sorry to burst your bubble. Couple other little surprises. Jonnu Smith is number 2 in tight ends for points per week at 14.2. Absolutely, really having a great season before the whole COVID thing hit Tennessee. So we'll see what happens, but he is a must start every week. When he's healthy and when Tennessee can actually play. Tyler Higbee, tight end 9's kind of more where I figured he would be right now. Tight end 9 in terms of points per week at 10.5. A lot of people are drafting him as tight end 6, 5, 6, or 7. I wasn't expecting it. I wasn't seeing it. I didn't think that was quite what he was there for. I understand he had this massive output the last 4 weeks of the season last year. There's still too much talent on that team, and it's going to get spread around. Now, he could go through another streak like he did last year. But with Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp healthy, Gerald Everett is healthy. He's taken a couple. Gerald Everett's taken a couple of targets away. Taking had a running touchdown. They've tried to really work on the run game with Henderson, and we'll see what Cam Akers can do once he comes back. So, not surprised that Tyler Higbee hasn't done quite as well as a lot of people are expecting. And finally, Austin Hooper. Last year, one of the top tight ends goes to. We all should have seen this coming. He went to a team in Cleveland with a head coach who the year before was a offensive coordinator for one of the top running teams in the league that didn't hardly throw to tight ends. So now it should be no surprise that Austin Hooper is tight end 25 with 5.4 points per week. It shouldn't surprise us. So I don't know if he can turn around. They're going to be so focused. They're really focused on wanting to get Odell back and going, especially after the week that he had this last week, and trying to keep that going. Jarvis Landry hasn't been utilized a whole lot. So much of this of their offense has gone through Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. Right now, it's going to go through Kareem Hunt and probably D'Ernest Johnson. So I don't see Austin Hooper having this big comeback rise. He is going to fade into fantasy obscurity because he's not in an offense that's going to target him. He doesn't have a quarterback that's going to target him. So, all right, those are some of my observations from the first quarter of the season. I hope you guys are ready for the next set of games this next week. Should be interesting to see kind of what happens, especially, again, following all the COVID stuff with Tennessee. But we're going to continue to do our best to give you guys the information and the rankings that you need in order to make the best decisions for your fantasy teams. And we want to thank you guys for trusting us and hope that you guys continue to dominate your fantasy leagues. Again, my name is Ryan Skullrud. This has been the SkullKing Sports Fantasy Football Podcast. We'll talk to you guys later.
Hey, SkullKing Nation. Thank you for listening to the SkullKing Football Podcast. Did you like this episode? If so, be sure to go to iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and YouTube to subscribe. Also, please leave us a rating and reviews to let us know how we can better help you rule your leagues.